I'm Darren Morton.
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift,
The Lifestyle Medicine podcast where we dive into the science of health and well-being. Okay, I'm going to say it, Simon, and I know that we're being preemptive here, but I'm going to say g'day to Dr. Matthews. Why would I have the audacity to do something like that?
I reckon you're a little bit premature. I appreciate the vote of confidence, but I reckon you're a little bit premature. Well, I did finish something difficult last Friday.
That's a way of saying it. Yeah.
Yeah. So PhD thesis submitted, now we wait and see what a bunch of educated and scholarly people think about it, and maybe then you can call me doctor. In the meantime, I'm going to enjoy a little cup of the world's greatest psychoactive drug, caffeine.
Okay, you do that right there. Yeah, and for our listeners last week, Simon and I had a meeting and he'd sent through his final document and I did the last look over it. And over Zoom, I said, listen to this sound. And the sound was a whoosh. It's the sound that a Mac makes when it sends an email off. And I said, that was your thesis being sent to research services at the university. So anyway, and that's the sound of sweet sleep, because it's just done for a little bit of a period of time.
What I didn't hear was the dull thud as those 300 pages actually landed on a desktop somewhere.
Yes, that's exactly right. Well, you know what? You did something hard, as you said, accurately so, last week. I am heading over to your part of the world on Thursday, not to visit you. I know you've reminded
apparently
me
not to visit me. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's a trying time. But I'm going over to Europe because I'm about to do something really hard too. And it is called the Swiss Epic. Now, the Swiss Epic, do you know anything about the Swiss Epic, Simon?
I know a little bit. I know it involves bicycles.
It does involve bicycles. It's a mountain bike event. In a moment of weakness, I agreed to do this, which is not the posture you want to approach this event with, by the way. One of my friends is turning 50 years old this year, and he's an exceptionally good cyclist. And anyway, he said to me, hey, I really would love to do this event for my 50th, and I need a partner to do it. And I went, oh, that sounds great. Well, good luck partner hunting, because I'd heard it sounded, anything with epic in it, sounds like loose marketing talk for hard.
Very hard.
He said to me, oh, look, I really need a partner. And then my wife said, hey, listen, you know what? She'd actually gone on a trip to Turkey last year, and this was about the time that he was priming me for it. And she said, oh, I don't mind if you want to go. And I thought, wow, what happens? And he said, oh, well, will you do some mountain biking in Switzerland? And I thought, sign me up. So I hadn't done a lot of riding, but anyway, I agreed to this. And after I was locked in and committed, that's when I discovered what this event actually entailed. And it turns out it was 5 days. So it's not a one-day thing.
So let me, I'm going to have a stab in the dark here, because you and I know someone from Switzerland. And in fact, we've, previously spoken to him on an old podcast we used to do. And I know a little bit about Switzerland. And the little bit that I know is that it's very, very mountainous.
Thanks for reminding me of that. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's heartwarming. I actually have discovered that is the truth. So much so that when I look into the details of this event, so it's 5 days. It's about 500 kilometres over the 5 days. So for our American friends, that's about 250 miles or so. But the fun part is that over the course of the 5 days, there's around about 12,500 metres of elevation gain, which is like about, I'd say, 40,000 feet for that. Once again, for our American friends, which means that essentially you're riding up to the top of Everest and about another third-ish again over the course of these 5 days. So anyway, I have taken a keen interest, Simon, let me tell you, in how to ride up hills most efficiently. Because my friend, my partner, and I have to stay with my partner the whole time, or more accurately stated, he has to stay with me the whole time.
He has to slow down to stay with you.
He does. So he's an exceptionally good climber as well as just a good all-round rider. So anyway, but here's what I've discovered. And so let me share this little insight. And I think that it has some really interesting application from a behavior change point of view. And being the residential behavior change expert, I'm going to pick your brain and you might be able to help me prepare better for this particular event. So here it is. Here's what I've observed. And it doesn't take long to figure this out. But if you want to go up a hill and you want to get from the bottom of the hill, point A, to the top of the hill, point B, there are two ways to do it. Number one, you can click into a really high gear. Okay. And what that involves is then you can get up, you can stand up on the pedals and you push really hard and you go quite quick, relatively quick, depending on the steepness of the hill. But you get from A to B, maybe. That's if you can sustain that heavy gear.
Because that's hard work. That's hard work.
It is hard work.
Yeah.
It's hard work. The alternative is that you actually select a low gear and it's almost, they talk about spinning.
Yeah.
And so here you are essentially spinning your legs. You don't go that far with each stride or each navigation, but you definitely, it's a lot easier and a lot easier to get there.
Can I say you left out the option of taking the chairlift?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so you've got these sort of two ends of the spectrum, if you like, and obviously there's some balance in between. And here's the interesting thing. I went for a long with my gun riding companion. Last Friday, I went for a long ride. It was over 100 kilometers. And we were going up and down hills. And as we came, we'd sort of get speed up coming down the hill. And then as we come up the other side, I would click into this high gear and I'd stand up and do these ones and then try and crest. But normally I didn't have quite enough energy or effort and momentum. And then I'd sort of have to drop back and then I'd get over and then we'd do it all again. Where he was a lot more even. And I noticed that even as he came sort of, as he started to slow up the up a hill, he would drop back into a lower gear and start this spinning. And then over the course of several hills, it got to the point where I wasn't surging ahead anymore. I was actually falling behind with my technique. And he said to me, "Hey, you know what? Can I just give you a bit of instruction?" And I said, "Yes, please. Why hasn't this happened like a long time before, 2 weeks out from the event?" But he said, he actually has on his bike a watt meter, and I don't have that technology, and so he's actually looking and seeing how much effort, how much wattage is he applying throughout. And he said, you've got to keep that consistent and you've got to keep it below that threshold level, because if you go above that, he said, which you are doing in these surges, ultimately it just, you run out and you can't sustain that kind of effort. And I'm thinking, this is really interesting terminology. He's talking about sustaining an effort. He's talking about still getting from A to B, but doing in a way that's a lot more measured, that actually can, once again, be sustained. And I thought, wow, how pertinent is this, this whole idea of behaviour change? And I'm intrigued, and I'd love to get your insights on this, because what I realise is that I think that when I first got involved in lifestyle medicine, I was really leading towards the idea of the best approach was to actually pick a high gear and really push hard. And the great thing about that, and what I like about that, and maybe that speaks a little bit to my personality type, but you actually can get there pretty quick if you go that path. The downside is that it's exhausting and it requires very high levels of motivation. And so I'm intrigued, your thoughts on this whole idea, because I'm familiar with the work of BJ Fogg's and his tiny habits approach, and his concept, his rhetoric here is that it's true. If you try and make these quantum leaps, right? Yeah, it might get you there quicker. Might not sustain you there once you get there, by the way, but it might get you there quicker. But the amount of motivation required to do that big, hard thing is really, really difficult to keep mustering. Because as we all know, we're all humans, motivation is so fleeting. Whereas the tiny little things, and, he actually says the smaller you can make these changes, if you can get to the point where it requires literally no motivation at all, very small amounts of it, your ability to get over that line and actually follow through then is going to be so greatly enhanced. So tell me, brother, tell me,
So this is all a really great metaphor for behavioural change, by the way. And there are so many aspects of this that we can talk about. First thing that I'm going to do, though, is just talk about, you mentioned motivation a couple of times, like you've got you can run out of motivation. I don't actually think that's true, because motivation represents the needs and the desires that we have. That's what motivates you. So, for example, if I ask you right now, what's motivating you to take part in this? You're going to tell me, because my friend's turning 50, because I want to accompany him on it, because it's a personal challenge, because I like cycling, because I like doing big, difficult things and being able to say I achieve it and so on. Whether you're doing the high gear and pedaling slowly or the low gear and pedaling quickly, that remains the same. All those things stay in place for you. They all still matter. So it's not motivation that fluctuates. It's your resources that fluctuate.
Yes.
Your internal and to some extent external resources. They're the things that we can run out of. And this, of course, explains why people feel frustrated when a behavioural change effort seems to fail them, because all those motivators are still there. If it didn't matter to you, you wouldn't care. If doing those difficult things, if being with your friend, celebrating with him, if all of that was unimportant to you, and you felt like your efforts didn't take you anywhere, you wouldn't care. Wouldn't make any difference to you. But it does matter to you, and that's because your motivation is still very high, and your desire to meet and satisfy those needs and desires is still very high. So I think it's important to get clear that it's our resources to achieve something difficult that deplete over time, not typically motivation.
And what when you say resources, because I'm thinking to myself, I'm very motivated to do this, and for all those reasons that you've explained. But I do know that in the preparation and the training for that, I know that there are days when I'm going to do a higher intensity effort. Like I'm actually going to have to go and I'm going to do some efforts up a hill. And you know what? Throughout the course of the day, I'm sort of semi-dreading it. And like I'm a bit like, whereas if I know that this evening I'm just going to go for an hour-long casual spin, that's a whole lot easier to get over that.
So let me ask you a question here. What do you, when you know you're going to do a higher intensity day, let's say that's tomorrow, what do you actively do to prepare for that, knowing that you're going to be doing that tomorrow?
Well, I'm more intentional about my preparation for that. I think probably what's your preparation? There's a physical and a psychological preparation that goes on for something like that. To do a hard thing like that, I'd be watching more what I ate, when I ate, the timing of that, because I know, I don't want to feel sick while I'm doing that.
We've talked about this before in relation to running too, the critical timing of nutrition. So even in your response just there, you're demonstrating that you're increasing the resources that you have immediately available to you, and you've divided them into physical and psychological very neatly. And all of those things are important. I would add too that for many challenges, there are social resources that we need. There are contextual and environmental resources that make a difference. For example, if you're planning a big day of riding tomorrow, and you wake up and everything goes well, you eat really well, you sleep really well, your mental game is at its peak, and you wake up in the morning and it's absolutely thundering down with rain and 5 degrees. What do you think?
Yeah.
Do you feel equally as enthusiastic to get out there? Probably not.
No.
So context and environment makes a big difference. And in the particular example you're talking about, being with your friend, you talked about, you joked about whether he's accompanying me or I'm accompanying him. And it doesn't really matter, because the point is that there's something shared about this, and that becomes a resource here as well. In fact, your friend's advice to you is a resource that you now have that you didn't have before you noticed the watt meter on his bike, and before he said to you, Darren, click down a gear.
Yeah.
All of those things potentially become resources, but the one that tends to get overloaded is actually the cognitive resources, the mental resources. That's where most of us peg out in behavioural change.
Lift is supported by the Lift Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The Lift Project is lifting lives around the globe, in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
The name for this is decision fatigue. And it does relate. Decision fatigue relates to the idea of the magnitude of the change you're trying to take on. It also relates to the extent to which you're embedding that as habitual in your daily life, or to use another word that we're familiar with, the extent to which you're making that the diet of your life. Diet, of course, really just means what you do every day, but the routine things that you do every day. So decision fatigue, if you think about someone who's, for example, trying to stop smoking, which is for most people, that's a difficult behavioural change. Think about what's involved there. You, first of all, have to make that mental decision, but you don't make that mental decision once. If you smoke 20 cigarettes a day, you have to make that decision 20 times a day. And if you're already trying to constrain the amount of cigarettes or the number of cigarettes that you smoke, you probably have to make that decision more than 20 times a day. 20 might represent the number of times that behaviour breaks through.
Yeah.
But in fact, you're making that effort more than 20 times a day. And now think about all the different contexts in which that effort has to be made. You have a meeting with your boss and you feel stressed out about that. You have a meeting with a client and you feel stressed out about that. You walk outside at morning tea and all your friends are gathered there talking and chatting and smiling and laughing, but you don't want to join them because if you do, you're going to be tempted to light up a cigarette. You go out with your friends in the evening, and the same thing happens. You go to a friend's barbecue or party on the weekend. The same thing happens. You get to that time after a meal when you've got that pleasant feeling of fullness after eating, and that's the time when you would typically light up a cigarette. All of these things operate as cues to have to make a decision in that moment. And if you think about all those things that you have to do across a day, that's just exhausting. It's absolutely crushingly exhausting to do that day after day after day after day after day. And that is one of the main reasons why behaviour change efforts often fail. And this is one of the reasons why thinking about small habits and small changes and thinking about automaticity or automating particular things, also thinking about environment and removing some cues, all of these things become important. The idea of small change is not a new one. I've got a book here which I've had since, I don't know how long I've had this book. I must have had it 25 years. It's called Do One Thing Different by Bill O'Hanlon. And it goes, Bill O'Hanlon's a family therapist. It goes back to the time when I was practicing systemic family therapy and solution-focused brief therapy in particular. And the principle behind it, of course, is change one small thing. And that one small thing, often will then amplify into other things. And the skill of the therapist or the coach or the behavioural specialist there is to support the person to recognise and amplify the other small changes that are accompanying that one thing that you've done different. But in your example of cycling, if you think about the mental preparation and mental efforts that are required there, you've mentioned the pre-riding mental preparation, and you've also mentioned in passing that for you, that's not always positive. It's very easy for you to slip into I'm just going to have to suck this up. I'm really, really not enjoying this. So there's a burden already. There's a psychological burden already, even before you swing your leg over the saddle of the bike. And then each time you get to the bottom of a hill, you probably go through a similar thing. Here we go. And you possibly even experience somatically a sense of dread as you push that gear lever up at the bottom of the hill. You maybe get a little surge or a little tightening of the chest or something because you hear that click of the gear lever And that really confirms for you. Here we go.
It's interesting you say this, because even backing up further than that, when I'm preparing, like I'm thinking, okay, I'm going home, I'm going for a ride, this is where I'm going to ride, I'm planning it out. I find the idea of what do I need to do? I need to get my gear on, and I have to get the bike out. I need to oil the chain before they're all these little cognitive loads that add to it. And
they're obstacles.
I found myself, I mean, by preference, I run. And I've realised why that is, because of the simplicity of it. I can go home, put some shorts on. It's not Lycra, and I apologise for the fact that I've even brought up Lycra in the conversation in relation to me, because I know that
definitely too much information, and now I'm traumatised by that image. I can't get out of my mind.
But there is cognitive load to all those things, and because in my head, cycling takes a lot more preparation and a lot more time. And the other thing that I've discovered, this is, insights. This has been so instructive for me in many ways. I also think to myself, where am I going to ride? And I think if I'm going to go for a run, I think, okay, I'm going to run around there. When I think about going for a ride, it's way out there.
Yeah, and it's much harder. So you cover a much greater distance.
It feels like I'm going to go a long way. And so it's already almost, for me personally, I mean, some people would delight in the fact that I get to escape. But for me, who's perhaps a bit time poor, I'm thinking there's a lot of effort required for this, a lot more so than this simple thing that I could normally do. Now, the intriguing thing, when I get out there and I start going, it's like anything, how you get on a roll is to start rolling, literally. And I'm enjoying it. But it's been quite educational for me to realise, hey, there is that cognitive load that comes with these things, which can add a tremendous burden and can be the difference between doing it or not doing it. Right? There are times where I've tapped out because I've gone, it's just too much effort to get ready today, and it's already cold.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the principles of nudging, of course, too, that we set up the idea of a nudge is that we give consideration to the architecture of the context and environment to make it easy for a person to engage in the desired choice, whatever that may be. And every little choice point along the way potentially becomes an obstacle, becomes extra time to think, and becomes a way in which you can lose someone. Someone falls off because for whatever reason, it's just too difficult. So in your context that you're talking about right now, for example, if you had a stand for your bike that you set up in your garage with the bike facing the driveway, if you woke up in the morning and actually put your Lycra bike shorts on, and please put something over the top as well, but if you actually put your Lycra bike shorts on and your cycling kit, if you took with you to work some sort of isotonic drink that you could throw down on the way home from work and things like that, then you would be removing a lot of those little obstacles and choice points along the way. And it would be super easy for you to arrive home, strip off your shirt, strip off, the jeans or whatever you've got over your Lycra bike shorts, jump on right away. Yeah.
It's fascinating you bring up this example. I was actually smiling as you started to state this, because what I did do in the end, I realised, is that I actually had a stationary, like a spin bike, and I put it inside. We have a back veranda area, and there's an outdoor television. So I put it in front of the television there, and it's undercover. And so it took away a lot of those, it's going to be cold, or it's sort of raining a little bit. I could do two things at once. So I was actually engaging with some podcasts or whatever while I was doing it. I even went to the point where I had two sets of shoes that clip into these special cleats, and I had an old set. So I just left that old set out there right next to that bike. And last of all, and it's amazing how much difference this made, when I go for on the stationary bike, because you get very warm because you don't get the convective air sort of cooling. So you sweat lots, so you don't wear a top. So this is really bad. I shouldn't even be saying.
Oh my goodness.
But
now you're telling me I've got to visualise Lycra shorts and no shirt.
No, exactly. This is like criminal, isn't it? But what's amazing is that it meant that it was one less item of clothing that I had to find and source, and then
there you go.
And it actually reduced my cognitive burden. Like it was, which is so
a little bit easier.
Bizarre to be thinking about this, but as you're saying it,
Yeah.
You know what?
Yeah.
One last thing that I've it's been, as I said, it's really been a behaviour change journey that I've been on, and I'm sort of living it in real time, and it's been quite fun playing with all these variables and how they're affecting my behaviour and what I can follow through on, what I can't, and times when I fail. And there are times where, that late that evening, it's now 9:10 p.m. and I know it's been hanging over my head that I should have actually got on that bike and done a hard session that day, and I didn't do it. I didn't follow through.
Yeah.
And it affects me. Like, I actually feel like I've let myself down. Like, and it makes me more determined for the next day. So there's been an interesting journey in that regard too. But what I have noticed is that those days when I have just written down to go for an hour-long cruisy ride, it's very little effort required, and I could go out and I can ride in some pleasant place, and I listen. I actually have some headphones that I can still hear the ambient conditions as well, but I quite enjoy that and it's not hard. It's not. I don't have to. It doesn't hurt. It's not painful. Your legs aren't burning, but there's something in the back of my head that says this is too easy, so it mustn't be doing any good. And
Okay.
I've had to quieten that voice, because it's not true. We actually know that with cycling and with a lot of activities, there's huge value in just doing that at a low intensity, low level, but still being there. And I've almost had to get to the point where, because see, if I do a hard session, at the end of a hard session, I feel accomplished. I feel like that counted.
Yeah.
That's significant.
Yeah.
Whereas these ones, it's like, maybe it didn't feel like it did anything. But what we do know is that all of those hour-long sessions, because maybe that's all I had time for that day, all of those added up to make a big difference.
Absolutely.
And if I hadn't have done any of them, then I would be a lot further behind where I actually am. And that, once again, makes me think about that whole, that those small things matter, and don't give up.
And from a lifestyle medicine perspective, when you do those kind of lower intensity, kind of easier rides, it's not just the cycling you're getting a benefit from. You're out in nature, you're around trees, maybe you're going past a river or a stream, you're listening to a podcast, so you're doing something to kind of enrich yourself in some way. I am making an assumption about the type of podcast you listen to here, but I'm assuming that you listen to things that that really perhaps challenge your thinking and help you grow and so on. And you're probably attentive to your diet both before and after, in order to make sure that you're physically fueled up to do what you need to. You sleep better as a result, and so on. So there are myriad benefits that come from doing that as a part of your broader training regime as well. The other thing that I would, so you've got this friend who's obviously got a very fancy bike, and he's got a watt meter, and his bike probably costs more than most people's cars, by the sound of it, because he's super into this. And one of the really important elements of behavioural change, of course, is pay attention to people like that and ask them questions. In other words, create a role model for yourself from whom you can learn. Now, that's not to say that everyone needs to drop into the low gear and pedal like mad. But interestingly, he brought a nuance to this, didn't he? So your starting position was, you can click into a high gear and pedal slow and heavy, or you can click into a low gear and spin like crazy. But he didn't talk about that. He talked about making sure you keep your power output constant.
True.
And therefore doing whatever you need to do with the pedals to achieve that. And that's where the value of people who are already doing those hard things comes from. And this is the self-efficacy idea of finding a role model and working with that person to support you to be able to make the changes that are going to work for you. Your low gear or your higher gear, lower or higher gear, may not correspond exactly to his to get that same power output. And that doesn't matter. The point is, you're now going to the important underlying principle here, which is sustaining the steady power output. And of course, that's the thing that makes things sustainable.
And that's great. And, that's a great insight. And I hadn't thought of that. And within athletic endeavors, they often, particularly cycling, they talk about your functional power threshold. So, because it's different for different people, for some people have the ability to, to sustain this kind of intensity and this output. Others, it's lower. And, the gearing is probably less relevant. It's really about what's your limit, what's your
exactly
sustainable
right.
limit that you can continue.
Yeah. So when I enjoy community runs, the 10K runs, 12K runs, sometimes a bit longer than that. And, some of those have slight rises. Very few of them have super steep gradients. The city to surf in Sydney, of course, is one exception to that. But there are almost always gradients and rises in some of these runs. Sometimes when I cycle, which is not often, but sometimes when I cycle, the same thing happens. And I've learned over the years to, I guess it's a version of your friend's watt meter, to tune into what this actually feels like for me. And I just regulate my pace until I feel like I'm breathing in a way that I'm able to keep going and moving my legs at a pace at which I'm able to keep going. And the other thing that I've learned, and here's a free tip I'll give you. I'm not going to charge you for this one. By the way, you already owe me a lot of money because I've got to go and have therapy for thinking about you in lycra and no shirt. But I'll give you this tip for free. When I'm running up a hill or cycling up a hill, don't look up. I look straight at the ground because I've learned over time that when I look up, my mind automatically goes, no. Look how much further you've got. Oh, you're never going to make this. It's going to be too hard. You'll have to slow down. You'll peg out here and so on and so on. And rather than try and fight my mind doing that, I just look down. And that way, it's a really nice surprise when the top of the hill arrives.
Great insights. Who would have thought you could learn so much about behaviour change from, I was going to say, a meagre cycling
From what
event.
meter?
I don't know how meagre. I don't know meagre is the right descriptor for it. But anyway, I certainly will be putting this into practice over the next
Absolutely.
couple of weeks. While I'm pedaling up huge mountains in.
I'm looking forward to hearing a report. You could have tried a little bit harder and come to Spain, but
I could have. Next time.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.